newspapers like the Wall Street Journal, you'll never see them mention that the more people we have, the more greenhouse gases are going to the atmosphere, the quicker we're going to cook our planet. David Brooks wrote a column saying, isn't it wonderful we're going to have another 100 million Americans by 2050. Isn't that great? Actually, hideous disaster. So one thing, population size and growth.
All right, you're the expert, but I believe there's 6.8 billion people in the world.
You're off by about a point billion. We're about 6.9 going quickly to 7.
Okay.
That's all right, because it was at the start of the program. There are many fewer people, you understand. We've been hundreds of people added to the population since we started talking.
So aren't we all getting along nicely, this 6.9 billion
Oh, yeah,
people?
we're getting along wonderfully. There's only 1 billion of us are starving. So what the hell, you know, only 1 in 7 people doesn't get enough to eat. Oh, about half don't live a life that anybody that would get this TV program would trade for. You know, have an income of $2 a day or less. The people are doing fine in Haiti. They're doing wonderful in China. Yeah, right.
Okay, so we have 6.9 billion people, and you're saying we already have too many for what?
Many too many. We can't come close to giving them decent lives the way we run the world. You know?
All right.
We're not doing it.
Okay, I'm going to come back to that. And we're going to have another billion people soon? When?
If you believe the UN's projections, there'll be about another 2 billion people total on the planet by 2050. Now, of course, that assumes that the death rates don't rise. There's going to be 500 million people in India by 2050, 500 million additional people in India. And they already, 75% of their water is totally contaminated. There's something like 100,000 tons of human feces deposited not in toilets but on the surface of India every day. When you add 50 million more people to that, you add another 100 million people to the super-consuming United States, we'll be very lucky to be able to have 9 billion people alive in 2050. All of my colleagues have serious doubts about it, particularly when we're facing dramatic climate change, the biggest effect of which is likely to be to reduce our food supplies, with 1 billion people already hungry.
So there's 1 billion people already hungry, and we have many, many more people coming. And I heard you say climate change is, the biggest impact is going to be on food supply. And maybe you can give me 3 reasons why it's going to have a great impact on food supply.
Well, number one, of course, and the most important probably, is that precipitation patterns will change as we change the climate. And we don't know where the direction of changes will be, but we're already seeing the edges of it in more droughts, more floods in places, and so on. Agriculture is absolutely dependent on precipitation, either directly in rain-fed agriculture or perhaps more importantly in irrigation, because about 40% of our food comes from the 17 or 18% of land that's irrigated, which means we've now, if the climatologists like Steve Schneider are correct, and I think they are, we've entrained about 1,000 years already of continuous change in where it rains and where it doesn't. And that is going to mean huge investments, struggles to change our water handling infrastructure. In other words, the dams will be in the wrong places, the pipelines are going to go the wrong direction, and so on. We haven't even begun to think about that. So that's one. 2, guess what? Many people in the world are utterly dependent on snowpacks and glaciers for the water to run their agricultural system.
Like where?
Like California, which is a state in the homeland of the greatest empire that we're trying to maintain. You know, here we are at the end of the American empire, just the same way the Romans are going. Our biggest agricultural state is California. It's utterly dependent for its agriculture on the water that's stored in the snowpack in the Sierra, and it's likely to melt.
So as the temperature increases, the southern parts of the Sierra start to lose their ability to receive snow, hold snow, and then
yeah, they can
water.
receive it, but the point is, if they receive it and it melts, then it runs out not in the agricultural growing season, but in the winter. So you don't have any of that for your agriculture. More serious, right now, about 1.6 billion people are dependent on the so-called Himalayan water tower, which is the glaciers and ice of Tibet and places like that, which is the source of most of the rivers of India and southern China. And the same thing can happen there. And then the third thing is that the productivity of our main crops decreases as you increase the temperature. Those people that are dependent on the Himalayan water tower are also dependent on wheat and rice that now is very near the top of its productivity ability. And we've already documented, people have already documented that the rise in productivity of grain has been sloped off by the rise in temperature, and we're not putting anything like the investment we ought to in trying to develop crops that'll do better at higher temperature.
So let me just go back to the water tower in the Himalayas. Because of climate change,
right,
the rising temperature, those mountains are not going to hold the ice and the snow until the rivers and the farms in the countries south or east of the Himalayas, Pakistan,
India, southern China,
Bangladesh,
yeah.
and as a result, farm productivity will decrease.
Well, farm productivity is already in trouble in places like India because, among other things, the water tables have been sucked down so low that irrigation in many places is going out. Many Indian farmers are committing suicide, and they're having huge problems with pests because the Green Revolution went in the wrong direction and we have misused pesticides. So a lot of people in the world are going to be in trouble for food, maybe even in the United States. Hard to judge.
Good. It's just staying on the southeast of the world. I think it's the southeast. They have nuclear weapons there, don't they?
Many of them, and in fact, the most recent studies of the ecological effects of nuclear weapons, which the original one was done in the 1980s and showed that if the Russians and the U.S. had an exchange, it would be the end of basically all civilization and most people. But it turns out that even a relatively small nuclear war between India and Pakistan, quite likely in the sense that there are all kinds of people there that are trying to foment it, using firecrackers, that is Hiroshima-sized bombs that are about 15 kilotons, tiny compared to today's intercontinental weapons, that would screw us over totally, ruin the environment of the planet, and of course, ruin the economy of the planet. After all, if Bangalore alone went away, you wouldn't be able to book any airline flights, you couldn't get any repairs done on anything, and there was a huge chunk of U.S. economy is dependent on people running computers in the center of India.
Okay, you mentioned rice, and rice growing a grain.
It's our most important food.
It's the most.
In terms of how many people get fed by it.
And it needs a tremendous amount of water.
Water, and it needs the right temperature.
And the right temperature. So temperature is changing, and water is becoming much, much more problematic.
Either not falling on rain-fed rice or the sources for the irrigation water for paddy rice are both threatened by climate change. It's not a pretty picture. But if you can drink a lot and make the internal environment in pretty good shape while the external goes down the drain. So there are things people can do.
Well, don't we have a lot of coal?
Yeah. Well, again, of course, the United States is absolutely insane. It's talking about drilling for more oil. It invaded Afghanistan, Iraq. Iraq. We're between Iraq and a hard place. But anyway, we invaded them to get their oil. It's the second largest known reserves of oil on the planet. We invaded Afghanistan to guarantee gas pipelines. Burning fossil fuels is insane. That's what's driving the climate change. We know absolutely that it's anthropogenic. That is, the climate change is being driven by human beings, primarily by burning fossil fuels and deforestation. And here we are, invading Iraq was like if we were hungry invading Iraq to get their supply of cyanide so we could eat it. In other words, we're going after oil and coal that we just should not be burning. It's nutty, but again.
All right. Now, it seems to me energy and water are connected.
Tightly.
And, of course.
You ever look at a nuclear power plant? What do you think that great big thing that comes up? It's a cooling tower.
It's a cooling tower.
And it needs a supply of water.
Okay. Now, I have a question about, I believe, California and EPA and other agencies have granted San Diego the right to build a desalination plant. Because, it's a realization that
short of water.
However, I haven't seen how they're going to power this plant. You need tremendous, as you know, a tremendous amount of power. You need like a PG&E or Con Edison plant.
To make even the kinds of water you need to give people drinking water.
Right.
But again, what's totally missed in this, look at the water situation in California. Where does our water go? Everybody says, put a brick in your toilet tank. Put a brick in your toilet tank or have a low-flow faucet in your house. Doesn't make any difference at all to the water situation. 90% of the water goes to agriculture. Another 5% roughly goes to industry. And if you look at the 5% coming to your homes, much of it goes onto your lawn. I mean, it's nutty.
Okay, so for the agriculture to
you're not going to have ag water out of desalinization unless you're going to pay $50 a pound for rice.
Okay, so I'm with you on all of those points, and you made a lot of good ones, but I'd like to go back to the desalination.
Sorry.
We need a big energy plant to clean the water, to make it usable for something. I haven't heard what kind of plant California and the government is going. It's going to be a coal-firing plant?
I don't know. If they were smart, they would try and do it with solar, but there are lots of issues of how you deploy solar, and I would say desalinization would not be the top one. Unfortunately, we've made huge mistakes in designing our country. We haven't designed it all for resilience. So, and you can see this every time 3 states go out because you have a bird flies into a power line. One of the best things to do with solar is do solar electric and turn every roof in the country into a solar collector. And then, for example, if we have the kind of solar storm that's occurred about every 100, 150 years in the past, we haven't had one since we've had a big electrical network. That network makes a huge antenna that if we have another solar storm would blow out every transformer in the United States. You blow out every transformer in the United States and virtually everybody in the United States dies. And we have not even thought about that in terms of our how we handle our electrical grid.
Okay, so the transformers, these are these big things that convert DC into AC, I think?
Yeah, right.
Okay.
But you see, if you get rid of them, there's no way to make more because you need electricity to make more. There's no way to pump gas, so you can't run any automobiles or airplanes. And so you're just out of business because everybody starves. You can't get the food to the people.
Okay, and a way around that is you're suggesting everybody put some kind of solar device.
There are many possible ways around it, but we're not even thinking about it. When we rebuild our infrastructure, we should be thinking really hard about how we become more resilient to dealing with these possible horrendous environmental problems.
Yeah, on the environmental problem, I'd like to go back to San Diego for a moment again. Coming out of the desalination plant is good water, okay? But they throw 50%, I believe, back into the ocean, and that has an impact on maybe biodiversity.
Yeah, it will have an impact, although compared to some of the other things we do to get water, the impacts are... Listen, there's no free lunch in this, certainly. When you already are vastly overpopulated, vastly over-consuming, and vastly stupid like our Congress, there's nothing you can do that's not going to carry a cost.
But the things you just mentioned, it's hard to change stupidity and all of that. But I have a question. You are one of the big stewards of the environment. You know,
well, we try, but I've failed, as have my colleagues.
It's a big challenge.
Big challenge. Haven't met it.
Okay. So there's going to be environmental groups who are going to, down in San Diego, that are going to try to prohibit the discharge of brine, I guess it is, and other things.
It's the salt that's left when you desalinate water.
And they're going to be worried about the seals, etc. And they're going to call upon the Endangered Environmental Act, which, correct me now, is the pillar.
Endangered Species, there are a series of them. The Endangered Species Act is what they probably would call on to try and protect whichever endangered species is nearest to the brine outflow.
All right. So calling on that law can slow significantly and maybe even completely halt, let's say, the use of the building of desalination plants, which we need, as well as solar energy. What do we have to do with the Endangered Species Act to allow us to move forward to an environment where we harm all the plants and at the same time harness new energy sources?
I hate to tell you, the Endangered Species Act and things like that just aren't going to do the job. the things that we have to do as the United States, which we won't do probably, is to set a standard. First of all, to recognize that we're already vastly overpopulated, and to the president get up and say, patriotic Americans, stop at 2 children, ideally just 1, get our birth rate way down and start declining. No one has ever raised even a semi-sane reason why there ought to be more than 140 million Americans alive at one time, and we now have over 300 million Americans. Okay. And all right, so that's one. Second, you got to change our consumption patterns. All right. You got to convert automobiles only into something that teenagers make love in, not a way to commute and so on. And that's another thing. And then we got to change our governance.
Okay. Now, you said a U.S. president has to stand up and ask for more effective family planning. However, there's no one who probably could get elected or have the support of the Congress and the Senate who encourages.
That's why I said we're not going to. That's why I said we're not going to do it. We need a president with more guts than any president is ever going to have.
But it's more guts than a president. He must have a political, powerful, almost like a dictator in a way. He must have both parties in his camp, and he has to get all.
He has to have a population that demands it. And how do you get a population that demands it? All you have to do is watch the so-called debate over health care to see that the special interests are easily able, with clever lies and wonderful propaganda, to convince people that taxes are wrong, that taking people who are sick and giving them government care is wrong. You got to look at the right wing. They've been extremely successful in convincing people that taxes are and government are basically evil, as we get larger and larger and larger and need more and more government because of it.
Okay, and do you see us co-opting the right to life, protecting the unborn?
Let's put it this way. I agree with Bill Clinton there. We want to make abortion very safe and very rare. And the way to do that is to make every single person who is sexually active have full access to excellent contraception. One of the reasons we don't have excellent contraception, particularly for men, is that our laws are such that contraceptives are difficult for drug companies to develop because there's too many legal liabilities that go along with them. Look, a whole bunch of scholars are getting together with a thing we call the Millennium Assessment of Human Behavior that faces a very fundamental fact. It's human behavior that has to be changed.
Would you say the name of that organization, that activity?
The Mob. Think of yourself as a mobster. The Millennium Assessment of Human Behavior, MAHB. Google it, mob at stanford.edu.
Just M-O-B?
M-A-H-B. M-A-H-B, but we pronounce it mob because we like the idea of being mobsters. You know.
Okay, and the mission and scope of this organization
is to face up to the fact that what we need fundamentally is a change in human behavior. We have to say the United States was redesigned, in the U.S., was redesigned in the last 100 years around automobiles, thanks to the oil companies, the car companies, and the rubber companies. The next 100 years, we have to change it back into a country for people and get rid of automobiles. And how do we start doing that? And discuss how you can get people to face that fact and then behave in a manner that will get there. We've had 15 meetings on climate change, Copenhagen being the last one. Utter disaster. How many failures is enough to convince people that the fundamental problem is we have an uneducated group of legislators and people in the executive trying to run a country? How many people in the Congress do you think know anything about science or environmental science or what we're facing? Almost none. And that's the sort of thing that has to be changed, and that's what the Mob wants to start, a global